Sam, you know a lot about animals, but I bet you don't know the answer to an incredibly obvious question. What's the most common vertebrate in the world?
Huh. Well, coming from you, my first response would be house sparrow, but I know that's not right. And it's probably not something like a house mouse. That might be too obvious. Your questions are always super tricky, and I know you're trying to get me in some kind of a trap here. So I'm going to guess maybe some sort of small marine fish.
Oh my gosh, that deductive reasoning would have put Sherlock Holmes to shame. Well done, sir. Yes, the most common vertebrate in the world, so we think, is the bristlemouthed fish, or Cyclodone microdon. To be fair, we're not really sure whether the species or some other in this genus is truly the most numerous. It's hard to count so many small things when they reach such astronomical numbers in the deep ocean.
Huh, tell me more. How small and how numerous are they? Are we talking about like millions or trillions of little small guppy-sized fish or something else?
Yeah, they're a little bigger than a guppy, about 5 centimeters or less in length, and they weigh less than a paperclip. But in terms of numbers, your estimates are way off. Guess again.
Okay, wait a second. I said millions or trillions, and you're saying guess again? Are you sure? A trillion is a huge number.
Yeah, I'm sure. A trillion is wrong, or at least off by a few orders of magnitude. Our best guess is that these fish number in the hundreds of trillions to maybe even quadrillions.
Okay, give me a second. I have to process how many zeros are in a quadrillion. Is that 15 zeros in a quadrillion? That's an incredible number of fish. How come I've never heard of the bristlemouth before?
I don't know, but I guess it has something to do with where it lives, about 500 meters below the surface of the open ocean, moving up and down in the water column with the sun. And I've not spent much time in places like that either, and my phobia for deep water is going to keep it that way.
Fair, but still remarkable that I don't know that this was the most abundant vertebrate on the planet. Feels like I would have bumped into that piece of trivia at some point in the past.
Okay, well, let me see if I can help you feel better. What's the rarest cat in the world right now?
That one is a little bit easier, mostly because we just spoke with Mwezi Mugerwa about the rare and elusive golden cat, which is the focus of his conservation work. And I recall during my research that the most rare felines are either the Amur leopard or the Iberian lynx, both of which number in the hundreds, if not less.
See, you're more of an expert in species abundance than you thought.
Fine, but let's talk about Mwezi, who's our guest today on Big Biology. He is a PhD candidate at the Leibniz Institute for Zoo and Wildlife Research. He's also a recent winner of the Indianapolis Prize for Conservation, a National Geographic Explorer, and current president of the Society for Conservation Biology.
Originally from Uganda, Mwezi's devoted more than a decade to the study and protection of the African golden cat and other species. His innovative work, particularly his approach to partnerships with local landholders, has provided new forms of effective protection in parts of Africa that have otherwise been difficult for conservation.
As you'll hear in a minute, Mwezi's passion for the golden cat is somewhat surprising because he grew up in Kampala, a huge city where feral cats were about the only wildlife he could expect to see.
But a series of unfortunate accidents and quite a bit of an ambition and good-naturedness led him to where he is now. He and collaborators have learned an enormous amount about this extremely cryptic and relatively rare species, lessons they've been able to apply to other species in other parts of the world.
But before we get to Mwezi's story, remember that we're now seeking your support, and the best way to do that is by signing up to become a podcast subscriber on Substack. Go to bigbiology.substack.com.
And thank you so much to all of our current subscribers. Over the holidays, we saw our subscriber totals rise almost exponentially. The only downside, most of those subscribers took the free route. We're so happy that you like what you're hearing, but unfortunately the full show remains behind a paywall unless you pursue the paid subscription route.
Remember though, it costs relatively little to keep Big Biology coming out, about the cost of a cup of coffee for a week. Best bet is just to go for a $50 subscription option. Then for the next year, you won't need to remember to support us.
But if you can't afford a one-time $50 subscription, that's fine. We offer monthly options too. In fact, because we never want money to keep you from listening and learning about biology, if you can't afford a subscription at all, you can contact us and ask for a free one. If you're a student, we want to be sure you get full access to the show. We're a nonprofit, so the only reason the show is paywall at all is to ensure that we can pay Molly, Brianna, Caroline, Clayton, and all the other interns that help us get big biology to you.
And if you are a subscriber or become one soon, you'll automatically be entered in a random draw for prizes. For every 20 new paid subscribers, we'll pick a subscriber, new or old, to receive a Big Biology t-shirt or poster with the cover art from the show. You get to pick the image.
And critically, paid subscribers don't just get access to new shows. They also get access to behind-the-scenes discussions from Cam and me, as well as extra audio from our guests about their lives and hobbies.
So please go to bigbiology.substack.com and sign up today. And if you lead a lab, or you're a parent, or are responsible for just a bunch of junior biologists, consider giving gift subscriptions to Big Biology. There's an easy process for that too at our Substack site.
And thanks again for all of your support, be it on Substack, Patreon, or elsewhere. We can't do this without you.
I'm Cameron Gallenbohr.
And I'm Marty Martin.
And this is Big Biology. Mwezi, thank you so much for joining us today on Big Biology.
Thank you. No, thank you. It's a huge honor. It's a pleasure to be here with you today to talk about me and talk about my work. And I'm excited.
Excellent. Yeah, we're really happy to have you. And before we jump into the work you've been doing, we have to congratulate you about a couple of prizes. So you were the 2024 Wayfinder Award winner, and more recently the 2025 Indianapolis Prize winner, and that's for an emerging conservationist. So that means someone under 40 years of age with the talent and drive to make significant impact on saving an animal species or a group of species. And I think that's one of the most prestigious awards for early career conservation biologists. So how does that feel, and when did you find out about receiving that award?
Yeah, not even in my wildest dreams ever. I ever thought I would be recognized with such a prestigious award. And it came as a huge surprise when I got the news that I was selected to be the Indianapolis Prize Emerging Conservationist for the year 2025. Given the amount of talent that's out there and given how competitive, like these sorts of awards are, to be selected to come at the top, as the winner of the award, it's humbling. It's humbling because, again, me starting out back in 2010, just after university, I never thought that I would ever be in such a space, on such a platform, such huge global recognition. It hasn't sunk in yet. I mean, I've received the award in September, but it's still, when the news broke, it's still so fresh in my mind. And I think, like, that symbolizes how grateful I am, not only to the Indianapolis Prize, but also the reviewers, the mentors I've had over time, the people I've worked through, the people I've walked this journey with me. It's a long list. And I think this recognition didn't only come to me, but it went to all these individuals and all these organizations.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about kind of your career path and how you got to that point. So tell us a little bit about, like, your progression. How did you become a biologist, a conservation biologist? Some of us grow up being fascinated by animals at a very young age. Some, reach that point later in life. What was your path to getting where you are?
Oh, wow. How much time do we have? Do we have 2 weeks?
No more than 2 hours. We'll cut you off at 2 hours.
Maybe the Wikipedia version.
Oh, yeah, it's been a rewarding journey. My conservation career, I would like to think it started early on, reading, like the National Geographic magazine, like it's called the Yellow magazine at that time. Like seeing all these, breathtaking photographs of wildlife and wild landscapes. I think that's when it started. And when I had the opportunity to choose what I was going to study at the university, I chose conservation biology and forestry. I think it's because of what I was reading and what I was seeing and what I was exposed to. This profession felt a very, natural path for me. It just came naturally. And I went to university here in Kampala, Makerere University, which is Uganda's largest public university. And I studied forestry, Bachelor of Science in Forestry. And in that program, I specialized in conservation. So there were two branches. You could either go and be a plantation forester, basically planting trees and plant plantations, or you could be a conservation biologist, the path which I took. And after that, I got an opportunity to travel south of Uganda. At that time, that journey was roughly 12 hours drive by bus to Bwindi Impenetrable National Park. To many people around the world, they know Bwindi as the home of half of the world's mountain gorillas. I think slightly close to 1,000 mountain gorillas in this very small forest habitat. So I moved to Bwindi as a volunteer to support one of the PhD programs that was happening in the national park at that point. And that was 2008, just after my final paper at the university. The next day, I jumped on a bus and I drove 12 hours to one of Uganda's remotest parts, really. What I haven't told you, I'm born and raised in Kampala, which is the big city.
That's what I was waiting to hear. You're a city boy, right? This must have been jarring to go to the most remote part of Uganda after growing up in the city.
I know. And so we wake up in the morning, we jump on a bus, and 12 hours later, we are in this very green, quiet, near pristine environment, something I wasn't used to at all, given how loud and buzzing Kampala can be. So I get to Bwindi. At that time, there was only satellite internet, which was only available from 8 to 10, from midday to 2 p.m., and then from 4 to 6 p.m. So all the other hours of the day, it was off. So I'm coming from Kampala where internet, but that time it was, readily available to many people. So I came to Bwindi. Internet is being rationed. We're using solar power. So the lighting was strictly on solar panels. There was no running water. There were no street lights. And this is a place where I'm going to be spending 12 months because the internship was 12 months at that time. And I'm like, okay, no cell connection, no cell connection. So growing up with my parents, I mean, like we never really traveled as a family, so we are always together like a unit. So now this was the first time when I was way out, far away from my family, and I could not even talk to them on the phone because there was no phone signal. But this is the most beautiful place I've ever seen in my life. So, like driving through the forest up the hill, if you haven't been, you should. Windy is spectacular. So, driving up the hill up to 2,300 around, whereabouts meters above sea level, this very thick, dense forest. Like, I'll never forget that sight. And the moment I got there, I was like, I'm not leaving this place. And I didn't. I didn't. After the internship, which was 1 year, I was lucky and fortunate to be hired to run one of the biodiversity monitoring programs for the field biological station. And that program was the Tropical Ecology Assessment and Monitoring Network, or TEAM, as we used to call it. And this was a network of field sites and protected areas in 17 countries across the tropics, a bunch of them in South America, a bunch of them in Middle America, a bunch of them in Africa, and then some in Southeast Asia. And what this network was basically doing was to assess biodiversity and monitor trends over time in relation to climate change and its impacts. So I was the principal investigator for this program at Bwindi National Park because Bwindi was one of the 17 protected areas in the network. During that time when I was doing the camera trap surveys for the team network and the permanent sample plots for the forest monitoring for the team network, this is when I stumbled onto the African golden cat. And the rest, I think, is what we're going to be talking about for the next 1 hour or so.
Yeah, yeah. Well, perfect. You set yourself up incredibly well. That was my next question about this discovery that you made. I was reading an article earlier today, and I think they had the initial image that your camera trap took of the golden cat. And I mean, it's just a wonderfully iconic image. We'll have to see if we can post it somewhere where the cat is looking directly at the camera. And so, I mean, it's just incredibly inspiring. It's very much a cat, but it's very much like no other cat that I've ever really seen. So tell us about it, and how did you become passionate about it? What was the history? I mean, people there didn't know much about it, but the locals around the park had been. I mean, they were quite well aware. So tell us a little bit about this species.
Yeah, I mean, you have set up this question really well. So this was a black and white image. At that time, camera traps weren't, I mean, they weren't new, but also they weren't very old in our field. So I think like that's a time when they're really exciting. And I remember we are using like this very big Reconix RM45 camera traps, like really bulky. Forget about the small ones we're using these days, the Brownings or the Bushnell. It was a big camera trap. And we put these camera traps out there in May for 30 days. We put them out and then we moved them to other locations in the national park. That was the first ever survey in Bwindi with camera traps. And guess who shows up? It was the African golden cat. Big, eyes, his eyes facing the camera. I look at this image and like, oh my goodness, what a creature. Like, even in black and white, that image is so vivid that even in black and white, like looking in the eyes of this guy, it's something I'll never forget. I was like, what is this creature? I got excited, obviously, and I was talking to people. I talked to my field assistants who have spent, by at that time, that spent like decades of years running this forest, looking for all sorts of things, and they didn't know this animal. They didn't know this animal. Only a few of the senior scientists, through their research, they got to know that that was the African golden cat. But what was so striking is that when I took this black and white picture outside the biological field station into the communities, the people made it look seem so easy. They're like, that's Embaka. And I'm like, huh? Like, because I mean, like, they knew it from the mother tongue, which is Ruchiga, spoken around the national park. So they knew Embaka as the African golden cat in their own local languages, but they didn't know it was the African golden cat. So I had to work backwards. So it's Embaka, and then landed back to the African golden cat. But what was so striking and so concerning was that they knew this animal from their snare traps. And some of these elders I talked to in the village, like, this is Embaka, and we cut it all the time in our snares. Now, that was very worrying because the field assistants I was working with, they had never seen this animal alive, right? They even didn't know the animal. But now the elders, who are mostly hunters, they're like, I always catch this animal in my snare traps, and it's Embaka. So that kind of opened two opportunities. The first opportunity was, oh look, we actually don't know so much about the species. And then the opportunity was, there is a lot of room to save the species. And this is basically when I started like writing proposal. My first proposal was in 2011 to Muhammad bin Zayed Peace Conservation Fund, and that was my first ever grant. Remember it was 15,000, and it was about, first of all, collecting some ecological data on the species using camera traps, but also to learn more about the human threats to the species from the communities living around Bwindi Impenetrable National Park. So that project was so fun. I was so fun because I was able to literally cover the whole national park with camera traps. This time looking specifically for the African golden cat. So what Tim was doing was a general biodiversity survey, the general community survey of what's present in Bwindi. But with this grant, I was able to just narrow and focus on the African golden cat. So I had camera traps all over the national park. And one of the questions I was asking, there were like three, four questions, but one of the questions I was asking, how is this species, how is this cat responding to human activity in the national park? Because I had already, figured out, given that if it's only the hunters that know the species, it means human presence is definitely one of the key threats you have to address ASAP. So the question was, how is this species responding to this widespread, unsustainable human presence within the national park. And there are some other ecological questions. There was temporal activity patterns, which we didn't know so much about, home range sizes, which we didn't know about, distribution, which we didn't know about. I also looked at prey. I was collecting scuts from the forest to look at diet as well. So there are lots of things I was looking at in that project. But one objective that stood out was that correlational study correlating the occupants or the distribution of the African golden cat with areas where hunting is prevalent or was prevalent. And that result was so striking that in areas where we had camera traps and hunting was happening, occupancy was this low. And in areas where we had camera traps and there was no hunting, occupancy was here. So way much higher. And the estimate was nearly 50% actually. Fewer cats. I'm using fewer in quotes because this wasn't abundance, it was occupancy. But fewer cats in areas with hunting versus areas where there was no hunting. So putting this story to the story from the elders that I catch these cats all the time, it made so much sense. It made so much sense. And that opened doors to start engaging local communities, bring them together, to start talking about the African golden cat, to start talking about why hunting is so destructive, and start talking about why we should stop hunting and find alternatives to bushmeat hunting.
Yeah, and that you call that Embaka, in honor of the name. So I want to talk about that in detail in a second. But the downside of doing podcasts is that when you have a visually striking organism like this, we only get to talk about it in words. We don't have pictures here. So can you share some details with the listeners about what does it look like? How big is it? One thing that I learned, the genus name is caracal. So is it a caracal? Because caracal, that's one of my favorite species, but it doesn't look a lot like a caracal. I thought, based on the images I've seen, but I guess it's related to a caracal, and maybe that gives an image to people. But generally, how big is it? How common is it? Across how much of the world do we find it?
Oh, yeah. This should have been the first question.
Sorry. yeah, I should have started there.
Because it's such a fascinating animal. I mean, again, that black and white image was black and white, but even then, it didn't do much justice to how beautiful and so different this animal is. At that time, we could not tell that this animal comes in different colors or color morphs because the images were infrared, black and white. The only thing you could know that it's either black or it's white, but you could not really discern what the white picture is. And that white could potentially be a gray color morph, it could be a golden brown color morph, or it could be a light brown color morph. And then you have the melanistic morph as well. So these are the four, depending on who you talk to, but I believe these are the four color morphs we have. Sometimes I say there are three colors because the light brown is so close to the golden brown. So it's really hard to discern the two. But if you got the brown and the gray and the melanistic one, those are the three most distinct morphs we have of the species. And it grows to twice, three times the size of your domestic cat. So it's actually a big animal. I don't know why in science we call it a small cat. For me, that's not a small cat. For me, that's not a small cat.
I guess compared to a Siberian tiger, though, I mean, it's not.
Yeah, fair enough. And also, I think compared to its closest cousins in the tropical rainforest, which is the African leopard, it's way smaller. But yeah, it can grow up to 15, 16 kilograms. It can grow up to close to a meter in body length and maybe 50 centimeters body height. So that's not a small animal. And it is an animal that can put down a small goat, can put down a small sheep. Yeah, can put down like a big well-fed chicken. So very easily, very easily. So this is not a very small animal. Very fascinating. At that time, we didn't know so much of its natural history, but now we're beginning to gather a lot of that data now. We know, and I think to our listeners, they'll find this really, really fascinating. So it gives birth once a year, right? And 70% of the time, it gives birth to one kitten. So that explains why it's been described as Africa's rarest, least known, least understood wildcat species. Once a year and 70% one kitten or one cub. So if you get that and then you overlay it on top of the human activity, bushmeat hunting, more specific, we see why there are not very many out there in the wild, because the natural history is not really on their side, but also the stories from the elders, the hunting families, they tell us they catch them all the time in their snares. So combining the two, I think it was one of my inspirations to and motivations to build a career around a species that people thought and still think is one of Africa's rarest wild feline.
Is it being actively hunted? I mean, when it's caught in these snares, is it sort of the snares are being used for dikers and other more obvious game meat, or is the cat being actively hunted by people around the park?
Very good question, depending on which part of Africa you are. So when I was starting this work in 2010, 2011, after that first grant from Hamad bin Zayed, my mind or my lens was focused on the Ugandan situation. Where in Uganda, because of some cultural values and taboos and totems, carnivores are not hunted. And it's actually historically you would be punished to hunt a carnivore because they are charismatic and they bring these cultural values in the society. So anyone who would hunt a carnivore like the African golden cat, you'd be frowned upon. Like, really? So in Uganda, no one hunts carnivores, but the methods that are being used to catch forest antelope, that are being used to catch bush pigs, that are being used to catch, different things within the forests. These methods are non-selective. They're indiscriminate, that they catch anything that steps in them. And if you haven't seen a snare trap, they are nasty.
Yes, yes.
So these traps are nasty. I mean, we've stepped in some of them ourselves during our field work, but luckily for us, we go in with strong boots covering our legs and our feet. But if you imagine like how tightly they hold onto a small leg of an animal like the African golden cat, these animals have no chance. The bigger animals like the chimpanzees or the gorillas or the elephants, they escape. They escape with wounds or they escape with lost limb, but they live for the large part. But for the small ones, like now the African golden cats, like no chance it will ever be able to free itself from the snares. No chance. So what happens, like the moment it steps into the snare, it either stays in that same spot it's being caught like for hours, so it dies of dehydration or bleeding. And what's so sad, because the hunters don't hunt the African golden cats directly, they have no use for them. So even when they come to check their snare traps and they find an African golden cat, they just leave them to rot, just like that. In 2019, we were very interested in estimating the level of snare bushmeat hunting and its impact on the African golden cat. And in 1 year, we estimated 80 cats were caught in snare traps and died. Out of those 89 of them were reported to be directly hunted by the hunters. So the 71, it was collateral damage, as I like calling it. But now that story is different if you cross from Uganda just next to DRC, and then you cross all the way to West Africa, so central to West Africa, where the African golden cats are directly hunted for different traditional and cultural values. It's a sign of power if you are able to catch the African golden cat and you presented it to a local chief. And because again, people have called them the phantoms of tropical rainforest in Africa, even for the chiefs, because they know the species is so rare. If a hunter can catch one and carry it to them, you buy favors from the chiefs. We see them a lot in bushmeat markets also. One of my colleagues, Eduardo, who is part of the African Golden Cat Conservation Alliance in Angola, just last year, he was able to find two of them in a bush market in Angola. My colleague Anastasia, who's part again of the AGCCA, just a few weeks ago, she sent me a picture. Hunters had caught the African golden cat in Equatorial Guinea. My colleague Franklin also has reported them in bushmeat markets. But you'll never see that in East Africa, though. Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, because in East Africa, people don't really hunt carnivores. But Central and West Africa, it's kind of both collateral damage, but also there is some level of direct hunting for the species. Yeah.
And so that was interesting to hear too. But I mean, there's a very broadly distributed species. It's sort of, is it most of sub-Saharan Africa?
It is 21 countries that we have recent evidence of its presence. 21 countries stretching all the way from farthest West Africa, that's Sierra Leone, Liberia, Guinea, that part of Africa. Then you come to Ghana, you come to Nigeria, you come to Cameroon, you come to Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, you come to Central African Republic, South Sudan, Uganda, DRC, Tanzania, Kenya, Rwanda. Angola is the farthest I think it gets, the most southern part of its range.
So I just wanted to kind of clarify. So, like, the Bwindi Impenetrable National Forest, National Park, has its name because I think it's not supposed to have any roads.
It's impenetrable.
So the it's supposed to be impenetrable, but it's clearly not very impenetrable if there are a lot of people going into the park and hunting for bushmeat. So are these mostly people who are living on the border of the park, or are they coming from like relatively far away to hunt inside the forest? Or do you know where this pressure is coming from?
Yeah, no, very good question because we have data on that, and we had this, we shared this, similar curiosity with you, where we wanted to understand with all this, widespread, totally out of hand snare hunting, where are these hunters coming from? So in that analysis, we discovered that it's mostly farmers that stay within 1 kilometer from the park, from the national park boundary, which makes so much sense because they are the ones that are close to the national park and they interact with the forest more often compared to families living away from the national park.
Hi there. You've been listening to the free version of Big Biology. To hear the rest of this episode, you need to subscribe.
To do that, head to bigbiology.substack.com and sign up for a paid subscription. There are a lot of different membership options available.
Not only will you get access to the rest of this episode, you'll also get access to extras like our episode debriefs, behind-the-scene content from Keating, our artist, about how he makes the cover art for each show, and more from our guests about their path to science and their hobbies.